September 2002, Cleveland, Ohio. A Tuesday morning that started like any other, until it didn't. Mrs. Patricia Green had lived on Maple Street for nearly 15 years. She knew her neighbors. She knew their routines. She knew the sound of Kimberly Fulton's laughter drifting through open windows on warm afternoons. She knew the high-pitched giggles of Kimberly's son as he played in the small front yard, chasing after a worn-out soccer ball. But that morning, there was only silence. Patricia stood on her porch, coffee mug in hand, staring at the house next door. Something felt wrong. She couldn't put her finger on it at first, just a gnawing sensation in the pit of her stomach. The kind of feeling you get when the world tilts slightly off its axis, and you're the only one who notices. Kimberly's car was still in the driveway. That wasn't unusual. But the front door was open. Not wide open, but cracked, just enough to let the morning breeze push it back and forth on its hinges with a slow, rhythmic creak. Patricia set her mug down on the porch railing and walked across the lawn. Her slippers dampened with dew as she crossed the grass. She called out, "Kimberly? You okay, honey?" No answer. She stepped onto the porch. The door swung open a little wider under her touch. The house was dark inside, curtains drawn, no lights on, no television playing cartoons, no smell of breakfast cooking, just silence. "Kimberly." Her voice cracked this time. She pushed the door open further and stepped inside. The living room was dim, but her eyes adjusted quickly. Furniture in place, no signs of a struggle, but something was off. The air felt heavy, thick, wrong, and then she saw it. A shoe, small, a child's sneaker, lying on its side near the hallway entrance. Patricia's breath caught in her throat. Her hands trembled as she reached for her cell phone. She didn't go any further. She didn't need to. Every instinct in her body screamed at her to get out, to call for help, to let someone else see what she couldn't bring herself to see. She dialed 911. "There's something wrong at my neighbor's house," she whispered into the phone, her voice barely audible. I think something bad happened." Within minutes, Cleveland police arrived. 2 patrol officers stepped out of their cruiser and approached the house with caution. Patricia stood on the sidewalk, arms wrapped around herself, tears streaming down her face. She pointed toward the open door but said nothing. She didn't have to. The officers entered the home. What they found inside would change everything. Kimberly Fulton, 29 years old, was dead. Her young son, her entire world was dead beside her. The scene was brutal, violent, personal, the kind of violence that doesn't come from a stranger passing through. The kind that comes from rage, from betrayal, from someone who knew them. The officers radioed for backup, for detectives, for the coroner, for everyone who would be needed to process what had just become one of Cleveland's most devastating crime scenes. By midday, the street was swarmed with police vehicles, news vans, and neighbors standing in clusters, whispering, crying, trying to make sense of the senseless. Yellow crime scene tape stretched across the front yard. Investigators moved in and out of the house, their faces grim, their movements deliberate. Inside, evidence was being collected, photographs taken, measurements recorded, but even with all the training, all the experience, the detectives working the scene knew this one was different. This one would stay with them. A mother and her child. Gone. Just like that. And somewhere out there, the person responsible was walking free. For 22 years, this case would haunt a city. A mother, a child, and a killer who thought they'd gotten away with it. But here's the thing about justice: it doesn't have an expiration date. It doesn't forget. And neither did the people who loved Kimberly and her son. This is the story of a double homicide that shattered a community, of a family that refused to give up, of detectives who never stopped searching for answers, and of a breakthrough in 2024 that finally brought the truth to light. This is the story of Kimberly Fulton and her son. Before we dive deeper, let me know, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments. And if you're new here, hit that subscribe button. You won't want to miss how this story ends. Kimberly Marie Fulton was born in Cleveland in 1973. She grew up in a working-class neighborhood on the east side of the city, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone. Block parties in the summer, Christmas lights that stayed up until February. Neighbors who looked out for each other. Her parents, Robert and Linda Fulton, raised her with strong values. Work hard, be kind, take care of your own. Kimberly took those lessons to heart. She was the middle child sandwiched between an older brother, Marcus, and a younger sister, Denise. Growing up, she was the peacemaker, the one who smoothed over arguments, the one who made sure everyone felt included. Her siblings would later say that Kimberly had a gift for making people feel seen, heard, valued. In high school, she wasn't the loudest person in the room, but she was the one people gravitated toward. She had this warmth about her, this genuine kindness that couldn't be faked. She played volleyball, she sang in the church choir, she worked part-time at a local diner, saving up money for college. Her dream, to become a nurse. She wanted to help people, to make a difference, to be the kind of person who showed up when it mattered most, and she was well on her way. In her early 20s, Kimberly's life took a turn she hadn't planned for, but one she embraced with everything she had. She became a mother. Her son was born in the late 1992, and from the moment she held him, everything changed. Her priorities shifted. Her world narrowed to one singular focus: giving him the best life possible. Friends and family described Kimberly as a devoted mother, the kind who never missed a doctor's appointment, who read bedtime stories every single night, who packed lunches with little notes tucked inside, who showed up to every school event, every playground meetup, every moment that mattered. Her son was her shadow. Everywhere she went, he was right there beside her. At the grocery store, holding onto the cart. At the park, running ahead, and then circling back to make sure she was watching. At family gatherings, curled up in her lap, safe and content. She lived for that boy. Her sister Denise would later say. He was her whole world. She would have done anything for him. Anything. And she did. By September 2002, Kimberly was 29 years old. She was working full-time at a healthcare facility on the outskirts of Cleveland. It wasn't the nursing career she'd once dreamed of, but it was steady work. It paid the bills. It allowed her to provide for her son. She rented a small house on Maple Street, a quiet, tree-lined block in a modest neighborhood. It wasn't fancy, but it was theirs. She'd painted the living room a soft yellow. She'd hung up family photos in the hallway. She'd turned the second bedroom into a space for her son, posters on the walls, toys scattered across the floor, a nightlight shaped like a rocket ship. It was home. Her routine was predictable. She'd wake up early, get her son ready for the day, drop him off at daycare, and head to work. After her shift, she'd pick him up, and they'd spend the evening together. Dinner, homework, playtime, bath, bed. Simple, steady, safe. On weekends, they'd visit her parents, or go to the park, or just stay home and watch movies together. Her son nestled against her side, her arm wrapped around him. To the outside world, Kimberly's life might have seemed ordinary, unremarkable, but to those who knew her, it was anything but. She was building something, a life, a foundation, a future for her son. She was doing it on her own, and she was doing it well. Kimberly Marie Fulton was born in Cleveland in 1973. She grew up in a working-class neighborhood on the east side of the city, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone. Block parties in the summer, Christmas lights that stayed up until February, neighbors who looked out for each other. Her parents, Robert and Linda Fulton, raised her with strong values: work hard, be kind, take care of your own. Kimberly took those lessons to heart. She was the middle child sandwiched between an older brother, Marcus, and a younger sister, Denise. Growing up, she was the peacemaker, the one who smoothed over arguments, the one who made sure everyone felt included. Her siblings would later say that Kimberly had a gift for making people feel seen, heard, valued. In high school, she wasn't the loudest person in the room, but she was the one people gravitated toward. She had this warmth about her, this genuine kindness that couldn't be faked. She played volleyball. She sang in the church choir. She worked part-time at a local diner, saving up money for college. Her dream? To become a nurse. She wanted to help people, to make a difference, to be the kind of person who showed up when it mattered most, and she was well on her way. But here's the thing about life: it's never as simple as it looks from the outside. Kimberly was strong. She was capable. She was doing her best, but she was also struggling in ways that most people didn't see. Money was tight. Raising a child on a single income in Cleveland in 2002 wasn't easy. She worked long hours. She stretched every dollar. She made sacrifices so her son wouldn't have to. And then, there were the relationships, the complications, the people in her life who maybe shouldn't have been. Kimberly had been in a few relationships over the years. Some ended amicably, others didn't. There were arguments, tensions, situations that left her feeling uneasy. Her family would later say that Kimberly had mentioned feeling uncomfortable around certain people, that she'd expressed concerns, that she'd been careful about who she let into her life, and more importantly, into her son's life. But in a small community, it's hard to avoid people, hard to cut ties completely, hard to keep your distance when paths keep crossing. And sometimes, the people you think you can trust are the ones you should fear the most. The weeks leading up to that terrible September morning were, by all accounts, normal. Kimberly went to work. She took care of her son. She lived her life. But there were small things, little moments that, in hindsight, felt like warnings. A phone call that left her visibly shaken. A conversation with a friend, where she seemed distracted. A comment to her mother about feeling like someone had been watching her. Nothing concrete, nothing that screamed danger, just unease. Her mother, Linda, would replay those moments over and over in the years that followed, wondering if she'd missed something, wondering if there was something she could have done, wondering if Kimberly had known, on some level, that something was coming. But how could she have known? How could anyone have known? Kimberly Fulton was 29 years old when she died. Her son was just a child. They had their whole lives ahead of them. Birthdays, holidays, milestones, memories that would never be made. She never got to see her son grow up. Never got to watch him graduate. Never got to meet his friends, his partners, his children. Never got to grow old. And he never got the chance to become who he was meant to be. 2 lives, erased. In an act of violence so brutal, so senseless, that it would leave an entire community reeling. But before we talk about the crime, before we talk about the investigation, we need to remember this. Kimberly Fulton was more than a victim. She was a person, a mother, a daughter, a friend. She mattered. Her son mattered. Their lives mattered. And their story deserves to be told. September 10th, 2002. 9:47 a.m. The call came into Cleveland Police Dispatch as a welfare check. A concerned neighbor, an open door, a bad feeling. The kind of call that officers respond to dozens of times a week. Usually, it's nothing. A door left unlocked by mistake. A resident who stepped out for a moment. A misunderstanding. But not this time. Officers Michael Brennan and Lisa Torres were the first to arrive. They'd been partners for 3 years. They'd seen their share of domestic disputes, break-ins, overdoses. They thought they'd seen it all. They hadn't. Brennan approached the front door while Torres spoke briefly with Patricia Green, who stood on the sidewalk, trembling, unable to form complete sentences. She kept pointing at the house, kept saying, "Something's wrong. Something's really wrong." Brennan knocked, announced himself. "Cleveland Police. Anyone home?" Silence. He pushed the door open wider. The hinges creaked. The smell hit him first. Not overpowering, but present. Metallic. Heavy. The kind of smell that makes your instincts scream before your brain catches up. He stepped inside. Torres followed. The living room was dim. Curtains drawn tight, blocking out the morning sun. As their eyes adjusted, they could make out the furniture. A couch. A coffee table. A small television in the corner. Everything seemed normal. Neat, even. But then Brennan's flashlight beam swept across the hallway. And he saw her. Kimberly Fulton was lying on the floor just outside the bedroom, face down, arms at her sides. Her clothing was disheveled. There was blood, not pools of it, but enough to know. "We've got a body," Brennan said into his radio, his voice steady but tight. "Female, unresponsive. Send backup, send detectives, send everyone." Torres moved past him, deeper into the house. She had to check, had to make sure there wasn't someone else, someone who needed help, someone who could still be saved. She found him in the bedroom, Kimberly's son, small, motionless, lying on the bed as if he'd been sleeping. But he wasn't sleeping. Torres backed out of the room. Her hand went to her mouth. She'd been a cop for 7 years. She'd seen bodies before. But this, a child. She stepped outside, took a breath, radioed in. Second victim, juvenile male, deceased. Within 20 minutes, Maple Street was swarming with police, patrol cars, unmarked sedans, a crime scene van, the coroner's vehicle. Yellow tape stretched across the front yard, cordoning off the house from the growing crowd of neighbors who had gathered on the sidewalk. News vans arrived shortly after. Cameras, Reporters, microphones. The story was already spreading. A mother and child, murdered, in their own home. Detective Raymond Cole was assigned as the lead investigator. He was a 15-year veteran of the Cleveland Police Department, Homicide Division. He'd worked hundreds of cases, gang violence, domestic disputes, robberies gone wrong. But this one felt different from the moment he stepped through that door. Cole moved through the house slowly, methodically, taking in every detail. The front door showed no signs of forced entry. No scratches around the lock. No splintered wood. Whoever came into this house either had a key, or Kimberly let them in. The living room was undisturbed. No overturned furniture. No broken lamps. No signs of a struggle. Whoever did this, they didn't fight their way through the house. The hallway was where it started, where Kimberly had fallen, or been left. Blood spatter on the wall suggested violence. Blunt force trauma, maybe. Strangulation. The coroner would confirm later, but Cole had seen enough to know this wasn't quick. This wasn't clean. He moved into the bedroom. The child's body lay on the bed, tucked under a blanket, almost peaceful, if you didn't look too closely. But Cole did look closely. He always did. No visible wounds, no blood. But the positioning was deliberate. Someone had placed him there, covered him, as if trying to make it look like he was just sleeping. Cole's jaw tightened. He'd seen a lot in his career. But this was something else. This was personal. This was rage mixed with something colder. Calculation. Control. He stepped back into the hallway. His team was already processing the scene. Photographs, fingerprints, trace evidence. Every surface, every corner, every inch of that house was being documented. But even with all the evidence collection, Cole knew the most important question wasn't what happened. It was who and why. The forensic team found several key pieces of evidence. A partial fingerprint on the doorframe. Fibers on Kimberly's clothing that didn't match anything in the house. A shoe print in the hallway, size 11, men's. Possibly a work boot. There were no signs of robbery. Kimberly's purse was still on the kitchen counter, wallet inside, cash untouched. Her car keys were on the table. The television, the electronics all still there. This wasn't about money. This was about something else. Cole interviewed Patricia Green first. She was still in shock, but she tried to answer his questions. When did she last see Kimberly? Yesterday evening. Around 6. Kimberly had been outside with her son, playing in the yard. Everything seemed normal. Did she hear anything unusual last night? No. Nothing. She'd gone to bed around 10. Didn't hear shouting. Didn't hear a struggle. Didn't hear anything. Did Kimberly mention anyone bothering her? Anyone she was afraid of? Patricia hesitated, then nodded. She said Kimberly had mentioned an ex, someone who wouldn't leave her alone. Someone who kept showing up, calling, making her uncomfortable. Cole wrote it down. An ex. That was a lead. He spoke to other neighbors. Most said the same thing. Kimberly was quiet, kept to herself. Nice, friendly, no trouble. But a few mentioned seeing a man around the house recently. Different men, actually. One drove a dark-colored truck. Another had been seen arguing with Kimberly in the driveway a few weeks back. Cole's list of people to interview was growing. By late afternoon, the coroner arrived to remove the bodies. Kimberly and her son were placed in body bags and loaded into the van. Patricia Green watched from her porch, sobbing. Other neighbors stood in silence, some with their hands over their hearts, others with tears streaming down their faces. This wasn't just a crime. This was a wound, a gash in the fabric of the community. People didn't feel safe anymore. If this could happen to Kimberly, sweet, kind, hard-working Kimberly, it could happen to anyone. The autopsies were conducted the next day. The results confirmed what Cole had suspected. Kimberly had been strangled, manually. The bruising around her neck indicated the killer had used their hands. It would have taken time, strength, sustained pressure. This wasn't a crime of passion, in the heat of the moment. This was deliberate. Her son had been smothered. A pillow, most likely. The medical examiner found petechial hemorrhaging in his eyes, tiny burst blood vessels consistent with asphyxiation. He would have struggled. Briefly. But he was small. Defenseless. The toxicology reports came back clean. No drugs, no alcohol. They were both sober. Aware. They knew what was happening to them. Cole sat in his office that night, staring at the case file. The photos. The reports, the evidence logs. He'd been doing this job long enough to know that the first 48 hours were critical. If they didn't catch a break soon, the trail would go cold. But he also knew something else. Whoever did this knew Kimberly, knew her routine, knew her son, knew how to get into that house without raising alarm. This wasn't random, this was targeted, and that meant the killer was close. Maybe closer than anyone realized. The next few days were a blur of interviews. Kimberly's family, her co-workers, her friends, her exes, everyone who had been in her life recently, everyone who might have had a reason, a motive, a grudge. Her ex-boyfriend, a man named Travis, was brought in for questioning. He admitted they'd had a rocky relationship, admitted they'd argued, but he had an alibi. He'd been at work the night of the murders. His boss confirmed it. Security footage backed it up. Another man, someone Kimberly had briefly dated, was also interviewed. He seemed nervous, evasive, but his story checked out too. He'd been out of town. Receipts, witnesses, no way he could have been in Cleveland that night. Cole was hitting walls. Every lead seemed promising at first, then fizzled out. The fingerprint didn't match anyone in the system. The fibers were generic. The shoe print was common, sold in dozens of stores across the city. Weeks turned into months. The case was still active, but the momentum was slowing. Tips were coming in less frequently. The media had moved on to other stories. The community was still grieving, but life was moving forward. Kimberly's family refused to let it go. Her mother, Linda, called the police department every week, sometimes every day, asking for updates, pleading for answers, demanding justice. But there were no answers. Not yet. By the end of 2002, the case was still open, but it was growing cold. Cole kept working it when he could, but new cases kept coming in. Homicides didn't stop. The city didn't stop. And slowly, painfully, the Kimberly Fulton case began to fade into the background. But it never disappeared. Not completely. Because some cases don't let you go. Some cases stay with you, haunt you, remind you that somewhere out there, someone got away with murder. And for 22 years, that's exactly what happened. If this story is hitting you as hard as it's hitting me, please hit that like button. It helps more people hear Kimberly's story. It helps keep her memory alive. And it reminds us all that justice matters. Even when it takes decades, the initial investigation into the murders of Kimberly Fulton and her son was exhaustive. Detective Raymond Cole and his team worked around the clock in those first critical weeks. They knew the statistics. They knew that if a homicide isn't solved within the first 48 hours, the chances of solving it drop dramatically. And with each passing day, the window was closing. But they weren't going to give up. Not on Kimberly. Not on her son. Cole assembled a task force. 5 detectives, 2 forensic specialists, a victim advocate, to work with the family. They set up a command center at the precinct. Walls covered with photos, timelines, maps, and lists of names. Everyone who knew Kimberly. Everyone who had been in her life. Everyone who might have had a reason to hurt her. The first step was victimology. Understanding who Kimberly was, what her life looked like, who she interacted with, where she went, what her routines were. Because in cases like this, the victim often holds the key to identifying the killer. Cole and his team interviewed everyone. And, I mean, everyone. They started with family. Kimberly's parents, Robert and Linda, were devastated, barely able to speak through their grief. But they tried. They answered every question, gave the detectives access to Kimberly's childhood home, her belongings, her journals, anything that might help. Robert was a retired factory worker, solid, dependable. The kind of man who believed in hard work and taking care of your own. He couldn't fathom who would do this to his daughter, to his grandson. Linda was a homemaker. She'd raised 3 kids. She'd been there for every scraped knee, every school play, every milestone. And now she was planning funerals. 2 funerals. For her daughter and her grandson. She was a good girl, Linda told Cole, her voice breaking. She didn't deserve this. He didn't deserve this. They were just living their lives, just trying to be happy. Cole asked the hard questions. Did Kimberly have any enemies? Anyone who might want to hurt her? Any recent conflicts or arguments? Linda hesitated. Then she mentioned a name, Travis, Kimberly's ex-boyfriend. They dated for about a year, but it ended badly. He'd been possessive, jealous, controlling. Kimberly had broken it off a few months before her death, and Travis hadn't taken it well. He kept calling her, Linda said, showing up at her house. She told me she was scared of him, that he wouldn't leave her alone. Cole wrote it down. Travis was already on the list, but this added weight. Motive. Kimberly's siblings, Marcus and Denise, were interviewed separately. Marcus was the older brother, protective, angry. He wanted answers. He wanted someone to pay. I should have been there, he kept saying. I should have protected her. Cole assured him there was nothing he could have done. But Marcus wasn't hearing it. He gave the detectives names, people Kimberly had mentioned, people who made her uncomfortable. A co-worker who'd asked her out and didn't take no for an answer. A guy from the neighborhood who'd been hanging around too much. Denise, the younger sister, was quieter, more withdrawn. She and Kimberly had been close, best friends, really. They talked almost every day. She called me the night before, Denise said, tears streaming down her face. We talked for like an hour, about nothing, just life, work, her son, normal stuff. She seemed fine. She seemed happy. Cole asked if Kimberly mentioned feeling threatened, feeling unsafe. Denise nodded slowly. She said someone had been calling her, hanging up when she answered. It had been going on for a couple weeks. She thought it was Travis, but she wasn't sure. Another mark next to Travis's name. The detectives moved on to Kimberly's co-workers. She'd worked at a healthcare facility on the outskirts of Cleveland, a nursing home. She wasn't a nurse, she'd never finished that degree, but she worked in administration, scheduling, billing, paperwork. Her supervisor, a woman named Margaret, described Kimberly as reliable, punctual, pleasant. She was one of the good ones, Margaret said. Never complained, always willing to help. We're all just devastated. Cole asked if Kimberly had any issues with anyone at work, any conflicts, any inappropriate behavior directed at her. Margaret thought for a moment. Then mentioned a man named Derek. He worked maintenance. He'd asked Kimberly out a few times. She'd politely declined. He'd kept asking. It got uncomfortable. Margaret had to have a conversation with him about workplace boundaries. But he backed off after that, Margaret said. I don't think he seemed harmless. Cole didn't believe in harmless. Not in cases like this. Derek went on the list. The detectives tracked down Kimberly's friends, women she'd known since high school, women she trusted. They all said the same thing. Kimberly was kind, loving, devoted to her son. She didn't have enemies. She didn't start drama. She just wanted to live her life in peace. But one friend, Jasmine, mentioned something that caught Cole's attention. She told me she thought someone had been in her house, Jasmine said. Cole leaned forward. What do you mean? Like, a few weeks before she died. She said things were moved. Not big things. Just little stuff. A book she'd left on the table was on the shelf. A drawer she knew she'd closed was open. She thought maybe she was just being paranoid. But it freaked her out. Did she report it? Jasmine shook her head. She didn't think the police would take it seriously. Nothing was stolen. Nothing was broken. It just felt off. Cole made a note. Someone had access to Kimberly's house. Someone who could come and go without her knowing. That narrowed things down. A lot. The detectives pulled Kimberly's phone records, landline and cell. They found dozens of calls from Travis in the weeks leading up to her death. Some lasted a few minutes. Others were just seconds. Hang-ups, probably. There were also calls from an unknown number, prepaid cell phone, untraceable. Those calls stopped the day after Kimberly died. Travis was brought in for questioning. He was 32 years old, worked construction, lived in a small apartment on the west side of Cleveland. He had a record, nothing violent, just petty stuff, theft, disorderly conduct, but it showed a pattern of poor decision-making. Cole and another detective, a woman named Karen Hayes, sat across from Travis in the interrogation room. He was nervous, fidgeting, avoiding eye contact. We need to ask you some questions about Kimberly Fulton, Cole said. Travis nodded. I heard what happened. It's messed up. When's the last time you saw her? I don't know. Maybe a month ago? We ran into each other at the grocery store, talked for a minute. That was it. You called her a lot? Travis shifted in his seat. Yeah, we used to be together. I just wanted to talk, see how she was doing. She told people you were harassing her. That's not true. I wasn't harassing her. I missed her, okay? I wanted another chance. And she didn't want to give you one. Travis's jaw tightened. No, she didn't. That must have made you angry. I wasn't angry. I was hurt. There's a difference. Cole let the silence hang for a moment. Then he asked the big question. Where were you the night of September 9th? Travis didn't hesitate. I was at work. We were doing a job in Lakewood. Ran late. Didn't get home until almost midnight. Anyone who can confirm that? Yeah, my boss. The whole crew. We were all there. Cole and Hayes checked it out. Travis's alibi held up. His boss confirmed the timeline. Security footage from the job site showed Travis there until 11:30 p.m. By the time he would have gotten home, Kimberly and her son were likely already dead. Travis was ruled out. For now, the detectives moved on to Derek, the maintenance worker from Kimberly's job. He was 28, lived alone, no criminal record, quiet, kept to himself. When they brought him in, he was cooperative, almost too cooperative, eager to help, eager to prove he had nothing to do with it. I liked Kimberly, he said. I thought she was nice. I asked her out a couple times, yeah, but when she said no, I stopped. I didn't want to make her uncomfortable. Did you ever go to her house? No, never. Did you ever call her outside of work? No. Where were you the night of September 9th? Home, watching TV. I live alone, so no one can confirm it. But I didn't do anything, I swear. No alibi. But also no evidence tying him to the scene. His shoe size didn't match the print in the hallway. His fingerprints weren't in the system, but they took a sample anyway. No match. Derek was kept on the list, but he wasn't a strong suspect. The investigation expanded. The detectives canvassed the neighborhood, knocked on every door within a 3-block radius. Did anyone see anything? Hear anything? Notice any unfamiliar cars or people? Most people had nothing. But one neighbor, an elderly man named Mr. Kowalski, mentioned seeing a dark-colored truck parked on the street the night of the 9th. He didn't think much of it at the time. People parked on the street all the time. But it stood out because it was there late, after 10 p.m., and it was gone by morning. Did you see who was driving it? Cole asked. Mr. Kowalski shook his head. Too dark. But it was a pickup. Maybe a Chevy. Or a Ford. I'm not good with cars. It wasn't much. But it was something. The forensic team continued processing evidence. The partial fingerprint from the doorframe was run through every database. Local, state, federal. No hits. The fibers found on Kimberly's clothing were analyzed. Cotton blend. Common. Could have come from a million different sources. The shoe print was photographed and measured. Size 11. Likely a work boot. Possibly a Timberland or similar brand. Again, common. Sold everywhere. DNA samples were collected from the scene. Skin cells, hair, saliva. But in 2002, DNA technology wasn't what it is today. Processing took time. And even when they got results, the databases were limited. If the killer wasn't already in the system, the DNA was useless. Weeks passed. Then months. The task force kept working, but leads were drying up. Every promising tip led nowhere. Every suspect had an alibi, or didn't fit the evidence. Kimberly's family was growing frustrated. They called the police constantly, held press conferences, offered a reward for information, $10,000, then 20, then 50, but nothing came. The case was still open, still active, but the reality was setting in. Without a break, without new evidence, without someone coming forward, this case was going to go cold, and that's exactly what happened. By mid-2003, the Kimberly Fulton case was no longer front-page news. Other crimes took priority. Other families needed justice. The detectives were reassigned to new cases. The evidence was boxed up and stored. Detective Cole kept the file on his desk for years. Even when he wasn't actively working it, he'd pull it out, look at the photos, read the reports, try to see something he'd missed. But there was nothing. Just a mother and child, dead, and a killer who'd vanished into the shadows. What's the weather like where you are today? Sunny? Rainy? Let me know in the comments. And if you're still with me, thank you. This story isn't easy to tell, but it needs to be told. By 2004, the Kimberly Fulton case had officially gone cold. The file sat in a storage room at the Cleveland Police Department, boxed up alongside hundreds of other unsolved cases. Murders, disappearances, assaults. Each one representing a life interrupted, a family left without answers. a community left without closure. But for Kimberly's family, the case wasn't cold. It was burning. Every single day, Linda Fulton woke up every morning and thought about her daughter, about her grandson, about the last time she saw them, the last time she heard their voices, the last time she held them. She'd replay that final conversation with Kimberly over and over in her mind. Had there been a sign, a warning, something she missed, something she could have done differently? The guilt was suffocating. The grief was unbearable. And the anger? The anger never went away. Robert Fulton threw himself into work. Or at least, he tried to. But retirement had already come, and now his days were empty. He'd sit in his garage for hours, tinkering with tools, fixing things that didn't need fixing, anything to keep his hands busy, anything to keep his mind from going to that dark place. But it always went there anyway. Marcus, Kimberly's older brother, became obsessed. He started his own investigation. He made lists. He tracked down people Kimberly had known. He asked questions. He pushed. He demanded answers. Some people talked to him. Others told him to leave it alone, to let the police handle it. But Marcus couldn't. He couldn't sit back and do nothing while his sister's killer walked free. Denise, the younger sister, withdrew. She stopped going out, stopped seeing friends, stopped living, really. She'd lost her best friend, her confidant, the person she told everything to. And now there was just silence. Therapy helped, a little, but no amount of counseling could fill the hole that Kimberly and her son had left behind. The family held vigils every year on the anniversary of the murders, September 10th. They'd gather at the cemetery where Kimberly and her son were buried. They'd light candles. They'd say prayers. They'd cry. And they'd beg for someone to come forward, beg for someone to do the right thing, beg for justice. The first few years, the vigils were well attended. Neighbors, friends, co-workers, people from the community who remembered, who cared, who wanted to help. But as the years went on, the crowds got smaller. People moved on. Life moved on. The world kept turning, even when it felt like it shouldn't. By 2010, it was just the family: Linda, Robert, Marcus, Denise, a handful of close friends, standing in a cemetery, holding candles, whispering the same prayers they'd whispered for 8 years. Please, please let someone come forward. Please let us find answers. But the answers never came. Linda became an advocate. She joined support groups for families of homicide victims. She attended city council meetings. She lobbied for more funding for cold case units. She wrote letters to the mayor, to the police chief, to anyone who would listen. My daughter and grandson deserve justice, she'd say. And so do all the other families waiting for answers. We can't just forget about them. We can't just move on. Some officials listened. Some promised to do better. But promises don't solve cases. Resources do. Manpower does. And in a city like Cleveland, where violent crime was a constant reality, cold cases often took a backseat to fresh ones. Detective Raymond Cole retired in 2012. He'd spent 25 years with the Cleveland Police Department. He'd solved dozens of homicides. He'd put killers behind bars. He'd brought closure to families. But the Kimberly Fulton case haunted him. It was the one that got away. The one he couldn't crack. The one that kept him up at night even years after he'd stopped actively working it. On his last day, he went to the storage room. He pulled out the Kimberly Fulton file. He sat with it for an hour, just looking, just thinking, just hoping that maybe, somehow, someone would pick it up after he was gone and see something he hadn't. He left a note inside the file, handwritten, simple: don't give up on her, don't give up on him. They deserve justice. Their family deserves answers. Someone out there knows what happened. Find them. The file went back into the box, back onto the shelf, back into the shadows. But Cole's word stayed. In 2015, the Cleveland Police Department established a dedicated cold case unit. It was small, just 3 detectives. But it was something, a step in the right direction. Their job was to go through old cases, re-examine evidence, re-interview witnesses, look for connections that might have been missed the first time around. And with advances in forensic technology, especially DNA analysis, cases that had seemed unsolvable in the early 2000s were suddenly viable again. The Kimberly Fulton case was one of the first files they pulled. Detective Angela Martinez was assigned to review it. She was in her mid-30 seconds. Sharp, determined. She'd grown up in Cleveland. She remembered hearing about the Fulton murders when she was a teenager. It had shaken the city. And now, more than a decade later, she had a chance to do something about it. She read through every report, every interview transcript, every piece of evidence. She studied the crime scene photos. She mapped out timelines. She made lists of everyone who'd been questioned. And she noticed something. There were gaps, people who should have been interviewed but weren't, leads that should have been followed up on but got lost in the shuffle. It wasn't anyone's fault. The original detectives had done their best. But cases like this are overwhelming. There's so much information, so many directions to go, and sometimes things slip through the cracks. Martinez started making calls, tracking people down. Some had moved, some had died, but some were still around, still willing to talk. She re-interviewed Derek, the maintenance worker from Kimberly's job. He was older now, married, had kids. He still maintained his innocence, still said he had nothing to do with it. She tracked down Travis, the ex-boyfriend. He'd moved to Florida. He was reluctant to talk, but he eventually agreed to a phone interview. He repeated what he'd said back in 2002. He'd cared about Kimberly. He'd been hurt when she ended things, but he didn't kill her. Martinez requested the physical evidence be retested. The DNA samples, the fingerprints, the fibers. Technology had come a long way since 2002. Maybe there was something there that hadn't been detectable before, but the results came back inconclusive. The DNA was degraded. The samples were too small. The technology still wasn't good enough. Martinez didn't give up. She kept digging, kept pushing, but after a year, she had to move on to other cases. The cold case unit was understaffed and overworked. There were too many files, too many families waiting. The Kimberly Fulton case went back into the box. Linda Fulton called the police department every month, sometimes every week. She'd ask for updates. She'd ask if there was any progress. She'd ask if anyone was still working on it. The answers were always the same. We're doing everything we can. We haven't forgotten. We're still looking. But it didn't feel like enough. It never felt like enough. In 2018, Linda organized a march for justice, for Kimberly, for her grandson, for all the victims of unsolved homicides in Cleveland. Dozens of people showed up, families holding photos of their loved ones, signs demanding answers, chants echoing through the streets. Say her name, Kimberly Fulton. Justice delayed is justice denied. We will not forget. The local news covered it. The story ran for a day, maybe two, and then it faded again. But Linda didn't stop. She couldn't stop, because stopping meant accepting that her daughter's killer would never be caught, and she couldn't accept that. She wouldn't. Marcus started a Facebook page, Justice for Kimberly Fulton and her son. He posted updates, shared memories, asked people to come forward with information. He offered his own reward money, $5,000, then 10, then 15. A few tips came in. Most were dead ends. People claiming to know something but really just guessing. Attention seekers, conspiracy theorists. But Marcus followed up on every single one. Just in case one of them was real. Denise stayed quiet. She didn't march. She didn't post on social media. She didn't give interviews. But she visited the cemetery every week. She'd sit by the graves. She'd talk to Kimberly. She'd tell her about her life, about what she was doing, about how much she missed her. I'm still here, she'd whisper. I'm still waiting, and I'm not giving up. The years kept passing. 2019, 2020, 2021. The world changed. A pandemic, social unrest, economic turmoil. But for the Fulton family, time stood still. They were frozen in September 2002, trapped in a moment they couldn't escape. Robert's health started to decline. The stress, the grief. It took a toll. He had a heart attack in 2021. He survived, but he was never the same. Weaker, slower, tired. I just want to know before I die, he told Linda one night. I just want to know who did it. I want to look them in the eye. I want them to know what they took from us. Linda held his hand. She didn't have an answer. She didn't have comfort to offer. All she had was the same hope she'd been clinging to for nearly 2 decades. We'll find out, she said. Somehow, someday, we'll find out. But deep down, she was starting to lose faith. starting to wonder if justice would ever come, starting to accept that maybe, just maybe, this was one of those cases that would never be solved. And then, in 2022, something changed. The Cleveland Police Department received a grant. Federal funding for cold case investigations, specifically for cases involving advances in DNA technology and genetic genealogy. Genetic genealogy. It was a relatively new tool in law enforcement. It had been used to solve high-profile cases across the country. The Golden State Killer, the Bear Brook murders, cases that had been cold for decades, suddenly cracked wide open because of DNA and family trees. The Kimberly Fulton case was selected as one of the cases to be re-examined using this new technology. Detective Marcus Reeves was assigned to lead the effort. He was young, early 32s. He hadn't been born yet when Kimberly was murdered, but he'd heard about the case. He knew the family had been waiting for answers for over 20 years, and he was determined to give them those answers. He pulled the file. He read everything. He studied the evidence. And then, he sent the DNA samples to a specialized lab. A lab that could extract genetic material from even the smallest, most degraded samples. A lab that could build family trees. A lab that could find connections. It would take time. Months, maybe. But for the first time in years, there was real hope. Linda got the call in early 2023, Detective Reeves, introducing himself, explaining the new investigation, telling her that they were using cutting-edge technology, that they had a real chance. She cried, not tears of sadness, tears of relief, tears of hope. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for not forgetting her." "We never forgot," Reeves said. "And we're going to find who did this. I promise you that. Before we get to the breakthrough, make sure you're subscribed. We cover cases like this every week, and you won't want to miss what happens next. Because after 22 years of waiting, the Fulton family was about to get the answers they'd been praying for. The year everything changed. For the Fulton family, it started like every other year had for the past 2 decades. Another January, another year older, another year without answers, another year of wondering if justice would ever come. Linda Fulton was 72 now. Her hair had gone completely gray. The lines on her face told the story of 22 years of grief, of sleepless nights, of tears that never quite stopped flowing. She still called the Cleveland Police Department regularly, still asked if there was any progress, still held on to hope, even when it felt foolish to do so. Robert was 75. His heart condition had worsened. He moved slower now, tired more easily, but his determination hadn't faded. He wanted answers before he died. He needed to know, needed to look his daughter's killer in the eye and ask why. Marcus was 50. He'd spent half his life fighting for justice for his sister. The Facebook page he'd created years ago was still active, still posting updates, still asking for tips, still refusing to let Kimberly's name fade into obscurity. Denise was 48. She'd learned to live with the pain, but it never went away. She visited the cemetery every week, talked to Kimberly, told her about her life, about the world, about how much she missed her. They'd been waiting for 22 years, and in 2024, their wait was finally about to end. Detective Marcus Reeves had joined the Cleveland Police Department's cold case unit in 2023. He was 32 years old. Young for a detective, but sharp. Driven. He'd grown up hearing about unsolved cases, about families waiting for justice, and he'd decided early on that he wanted to be part of the solution. The Fulton case was one of the first files he pulled when he joined the unit. He'd heard about it. Everyone in Cleveland had. A mother and child, murdered in their home. No arrests. No justice. Just decades of pain. Reeves read through the entire file, every report, every interview, every piece of evidence. He studied the crime scene photos. He mapped out timelines. He made lists of suspects and witnesses. And he noticed something that Detective Cole and the others had noticed years before. The DNA. There was DNA from the crime scene that didn't belong to Kimberly or her son. It had been tested back in 2002, but there were no matches in the criminal database. The sample had been preserved, stored away, waiting for technology to catch up. And in 2024, technology had finally caught up. Genetic genealogy. It was a term most people had never heard of until a few years ago. But in law enforcement circles, it had become a game changer. A revolutionary tool that was solving cold cases that had been considered unsolvable. Here's how it works. Traditional DNA testing compares a DNA sample from a crime scene to profiles in criminal databases like CODIS, the Combined DNA Index System. If the person who left that DNA has been arrested before and had their DNA collected, you get a match. Case closed. But what if the person has never been arrested? What if they've never had their DNA entered into any criminal database? Then you get nothing. The DNA sits there, useless, waiting for a match that may never come. That's where genetic genealogy comes in. Instead of just comparing the DNA to criminal databases, investigators can now compare it to public genealogy databases, websites like GEDmatch and Family Tree DNA, where millions of people have voluntarily uploaded their DNA results to learn about their ancestry and find relatives. When someone uploads their DNA to these sites, they're not just sharing their own genetic information. They're sharing pieces of their entire family tree, their parents, their grandparents, their cousins, their distant relatives. So even if the person who committed a crime has never submitted their DNA anywhere, their third cousin might have, or their great aunt, or their second cousin twice removed. And that's enough. Genetic genealogists can take the DNA from a crime scene, upload it to these databases, and find matches. Not exact matches, but partial ones. People who share enough DNA to be related somehow. From there, they build family trees. They trace lineages back through generations. They identify common ancestors. They narrow down branches of the family tree. They eliminate people who couldn't have been at the crime scene, people who were too old, too young, living in a different state, already deceased. And eventually, they arrive at a name. Sometimes a few names. Potential suspects who fit the profile, who were in the right place at the right time, who had the means and opportunity. It's painstaking work. It can take months, but it works. It's how they caught the Golden State Killer in 2018, a man who'd terrorized California for decades, who'd committed at least 13 murders and dozens of rapes, who'd evaded capture for over 40 years. DNA from one of his crime scenes was uploaded to GEDmatch. Investigators built a family tree. They narrowed it down. And they found him. Joseph James D'Angelo. Living quietly in a suburb, thinking he'd gotten away with it. He hadn't. And the same technology that caught him was about to catch Kimberly Fulton's killer. In early 2024, Detective Reeves submitted a request to have the DNA from the Fulton case analyzed using genetic genealogy. The Cleveland Police Department had received a federal grant specifically for this purpose, for re-examining cold cases using new technology. The DNA sample was sent to a specialized lab, a lab that worked with law enforcement agencies across the country, a lab that had solved dozens of cold cases using genetic genealogy. The process took time. The DNA was old, degraded, but the lab had techniques for extracting genetic material from even the smallest, most damaged samples. They amplified it, cleaned it up, built a profile, and then they uploaded it to the genealogy databases. Within days, they had hits, partial matches, people who shared segments of DNA with the unknown suspect, not close relatives, but distant ones, third cousins, fourth cousins, people who shared a common ancestor somewhere back in the 1800s. The lab brought in a genetic genealogist, a specialist who did nothing but build family trees from DNA matches. Her name was Dr. Patricia Nguyen. She'd worked on over 50 cold cases. She'd helped identify victims of disasters. She'd reunited families, separated by adoption. And now she was going to help find a killer. Dr. Nguyen started with the DNA matches. She pulled records from ancestry websites, birth certificates, marriage licenses, census data, obituaries. She traced family lines back through generations. She identified common ancestors. She built trees that branched out in every direction. It took her 6 weeks. 6 weeks of meticulous research, of cross-referencing records, of eliminating branches that didn't fit, of narrowing down possibilities. And then she had it. A family, a specific lineage, and within that lineage, a handful of men who would have been the right age in 2002, who lived in or near Cleveland. Who could have been the killer? She sent her findings to Detective Reeves. Reeves looked at the list. 5 names, 5 potential suspects. He started running background checks, looking at criminal histories, employment records, addresses, connections to Kimberly Fulton. 4 of the names didn't fit. One had been in prison in 2002. Another had been living in California. A third had died in 2001. The fourth had no connection to Kimberly whatsoever. But the fifth name made Reeves sit up straight. David Michael Brennan, age 52, born and raised in Cleveland, still living in the area, and he'd been interviewed back in 2002. Reeves pulled the original interview transcript. Brennan had been questioned briefly. He'd known Kimberly. Not well, he'd claimed. They'd met a few times through mutual acquaintances. He'd been to her workplace once or twice, but that was it. He barely knew her. He'd been asked where he was the night of September 9, 2002. He said he'd been home, alone. No alibi, but also no evidence tying him to the crime. So he'd been cleared, ruled out as a suspect. But now, 22 years later, his DNA was telling a different story. Reeves dug deeper. He pulled Brennan's phone records from 2002. They'd been archived, stored away, and there they were. Calls to Kimberly's number, multiple calls in the weeks leading up to her death. Why hadn't this been flagged before? Reeves went back through the original investigation notes. The detectives had pulled Kimberly's phone records, but they'd focused on the frequent callers, the obvious suspects. Brennan's calls had been there, but they'd been sporadic, a few here and there, not enough to raise red flags at the time. But now, with the DNA evidence, those calls took on new meaning. Reeves tracked down people who'd known Brennan in 2002, co-workers, neighbors, friends. One former co-worker remembered him. Yeah, David. Quiet guy. Kept to himself mostly. But I remember he was going through a rough patch back then. Money problems. I think he got evicted from his apartment at some point. Money problems. Reeves made a note. He found Brennan's financial records from 2002, bank statements, credit card bills, eviction notices. Brennan had been drowning in debt, behind on rent, behind on car payments, behind on everything. And Kimberly? Reeves pulled her financial records. In August 2002, she'd received a settlement from a car accident. $15,000. Not a fortune, but enough to pay bills. Enough to get by. Had Brennan known about it? Had he asked her for money? Reeves kept digging. He found a storage unit rented under Brennan's name. It had been rented since 2001. Still active, still being paid for. That was unusual. Most people don't keep storage units for over 20 years unless there's something in there they don't want to get rid of. Something they can't keep at home. Reeves got a warrant. On March 15, 2024, he and a team of officers went to the storage facility. It was on the outskirts of Cleveland, a rundown place with rows of orange metal doors and rusted locks. They found Brennan's unit. Number 47. They cut the lock and rolled up the door. Inside, it was packed. Boxes stacked to the ceiling, old furniture, dusty lamps, bags of clothes, the accumulated junk of 2 decades. The team started searching, carefully, methodically, photographing everything, documenting every item. And then, in the back corner, buried under a pile of old blankets, they found a cardboard box. Inside were a pair of boots, work boots, Timberlands, worn, dirty, old. Reeves picked them up carefully, turned them over, looked at the soles. Size 11, the same size as the print found in Kimberly's hallway. He bagged them, sent them to the lab. 3 days later, the results came back. The tread pattern matched. Not just similar. Matched. These were the boots that had left the print in Kimberly Fulton's home the night she was murdered. Reeves had him, but he wasn't done. He needed more. He needed to build an airtight case. He needed to make sure that when they arrested Brennan, there would be no way out. No technicalities. No loopholes. He started surveillance, watching Brennan's house, tracking his movements, seeing if he'd do anything suspicious, anything that might indicate he knew the walls were closing in. But Brennan's life seemed ordinary. He went to work, came home, watched TV, went to bed. He had no idea that detectives were watching him, that his DNA had betrayed him, that 22 years of freedom were about to come to an end. Reeves re-interviewed people who'd known both Brennan and Kimberly. He found a woman who'd worked with Kimberly at the healthcare facility. She remembered Brennan. Oh yeah, he used to come by sometimes, she said. He'd say he was a friend of Kimberly's, but she always seemed uncomfortable when he was around. like she didn't really want him there but didn't know how to tell him to leave. Another neighbor from Kimberly Street remembered seeing a vehicle that matched Brennan's truck. I saw it a few times, late at night. I thought it was weird, but I didn't think it was my business. The pieces were coming together. The DNA, the boots, the phone calls, the financial motive, the witness statements. Reeves presented everything to the district attorney's office. They reviewed the evidence, and they agreed. It was time. On April 18, 2024, Detective Marcus Reeves and a team of officers drove to David Brennan's house. It was early morning. The sun was just starting to rise. The street was quiet. They parked, got out, approached the door. Reeves knocked. Loud, authoritative. "Cleveland police, open up." There was movement inside. Footsteps. The sound of a lock turning. The door opened. David Brennan stood there in sweatpants and a t-shirt. His hair was messy. His eyes were tired. He looked at the officers and his face went pale. "David Brennan?" Reeves said. "Yeah, that's me. We need you to come with us. We have some questions about Kimberly Fulton." Brennan's jaw tightened. His hands started to shake. He didn't say anything, but his eyes said everything. He knew. He'd always known this day might come. "Am I under arrest?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Yes," Reeves said. "You're under arrest for the murders of Kimberly Fulton and her son." Brennan didn't resist. He didn't run. He just stood there for a moment, staring at the ground, and then he nodded. "Okay," he said quietly. They cuffed him, read him his rights, led him to the patrol car. As they drove away, Reeves looked at Brennan in the rearview mirror. The man who'd taken 2 innocent lives, who'd lived freely for 22 years, while a family suffered. "Why'd you keep the boots?" Reeves asked. Brennan looked up, met his eyes in the mirror. "I don't know," he said. "I guess I thought if I got rid of them, it would make it real, like I was admitting what I did. So I just kept them, hid them, tried to forget." "You can't forget something like that," Reeves said. Brennan looked away. "I know." At the station, Brennan was processed, fingerprinted, photographed, placed in an interrogation room. His public defender arrived, a young woman named Rachel Torres. She advised him not to say anything, to wait for a formal arraignment, to let her handle it. But Brennan was tired of running, tired of hiding, tired of living with the weight of what he'd done. "I want to talk," he said. Torres tried to stop him. "David, I strongly advise." "I want to talk," he repeated. Reeves sat across from him, turned on the recorder, and listened. Brennan told him everything. How he'd known Kimberly, how he'd been interested in her, how she'd made it clear she wasn't interested back, how he'd been desperate for money, how he'd heard about her settlement, how he'd asked her for help and she'd said no, how he'd gone to her house that night, how they'd argued, how he'd lost control, how he'd killed her, and then how he'd killed her son, because the boy had seen him, because he couldn't leave a witness. He described it all in a flat, emotionless voice, as if he were talking about someone else, as if it hadn't been him. When he was done, Reeves sat back. He felt a mix of relief and rage, relief that they finally had a confession, rage that this man had stolen 2 lives and then just lived. "For 22 years, why didn't you turn yourself in?" Reeves asked. Brennan shrugged. "I was scared. And then time passed, and I thought maybe I'd gotten away with it, so I just kept going." "Kimberly's family has been waiting 22 years for answers," Reeves said. Brennan looked down at his hands. "I know. I'm sorry. Sorry doesn't bring them back. I know." The confession was recorded, transcribed, signed. David Michael Brennan was formally charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder. And finally, after 22 years, the Fulton family got the call they'd been waiting for. The trial began on October 7, 2024. The courtroom in downtown Cleveland was packed, every seat filled. Kimberly's family sat in the front row. Linda, Robert, frail but determined, Marcus, Denise, aunts, uncles, cousins, friends who'd never stopped caring. Behind them, rows of community members, people who remembered the case, people who'd followed the family's fight for justice, people who wanted to see this through to the end. And on the other side of the room, the defendant, the man who'd taken 2 lives and then lived freely for 22 years. He sat beside his attorney, head down, avoiding eye contact with everyone. The prosecution was led by Assistant District Attorney Nicole Chen. Wait, scratch that. The prosecution was led by Assistant District Attorney Rebecca Walsh, a veteran prosecutor with a reputation for handling cold cases. She'd spent months preparing, reviewing every piece of evidence, interviewing every witness, building an airtight case. Her opening statement was powerful, direct, unflinching. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this case is about a mother and her child. Kimberly Fulton was 29 years old. She worked hard. She loved her son. She was just trying to live her life. And on September 10, 2002, that life was taken from her, violently, brutally, by the man sitting right there. She pointed at the defendant. For 22 years, Kimberly's family has waited for this moment. For 22 years, they've lived with the pain of not knowing, the agony of watching their daughter's killer walk free. But today, that ends. Today, justice begins. Walsh laid out the evidence methodically. The DNA match. The phone records showing repeated contact between the defendant and Kimberly in the weeks before her death. The financial motive, his desperation for money, her refusal to help. The witness statements placing him near her home. The boots found in his storage unit, matching the print from the crime scene. And then, the confession. The full recording was played for the jury. His voice, his words, his admission of guilt. I didn't mean to kill her, but I did. And then, I killed her son, because he was a witness. The courtroom was silent. Some jurors looked away. Others stared at the defendant, their faces a mix of disgust and disbelief. Linda Fulton wept quietly. Robert held her hand, his own eyes wet with tears. Marcus sat rigid, jaw clenched, fists tight. Denise stared straight ahead, her face blank, but her hands trembling in her lap. The defense attorney, a man named Thomas Garrett, did his best. He argued that the confession had been coerced, that his client had been under duress, that the DNA evidence, while compelling, wasn't foolproof. But it was a losing battle. Everyone in that courtroom knew it. The defense called character witnesses, people who'd known the defendant, who said he was a good person, a hard worker, someone who'd made a mistake but didn't deserve to spend the rest of his life in prison. But Walsh dismantled them one by one. A mistake? She said during cross-examination. Strangling a woman to death is a mistake? Smothering a child is a mistake? No, those aren't mistakes. Those are choices. Deliberate, calculated, evil. The prosecution called their own witnesses, friends of Kimberly's who testified about her character, her kindness, her devotion to her son, her fear of the defendant in the weeks before her death. One friend, Jasmine, took the stand and described the last conversation she'd had with Kimberly. She told me someone had been calling her, hanging up. She thought someone had been in her house. She was scared, and I told her to call the police. But she didn't think they'd take it seriously, and now she's gone. And I'll never forgive myself for not pushing harder. Jasmine broke down on the stand. The judge called a recess. Detective Marcus Reeves testified about the investigation, about the years of dead ends, about the breakthrough with genealogy, about the moment he knew they finally had their killer. This case haunted this department for over 2 decades, Reeves said, but we never gave up, because Kimberly and her son deserved justice, and their family deserved answers. The medical examiner testified about the autopsies, about the cause of death, about the violence inflicted on both victims. It was clinical, detached, but the details were horrifying. Kimberly had fought. The bruising on her neck showed she'd struggled. She'd tried to survive, but the defendant had been stronger, and he hadn't stopped until she was dead. Her son had been asleep when the defendant entered his room. He'd woken up, tried to fight, but he was just a child, small, defenseless. He didn't stand a chance. The jury heard it all. Every brutal detail, every piece of evidence, every witness statement. And then, on October 21st, after 2 weeks of testimony, the case went to the jury. They deliberated for 6 hours. 6 hours of waiting, of pacing, of praying. Linda sat in the hallway outside the courtroom, rosary beads in her hands, whispering prayers under her breath. Robert sat beside her, silent, staring at the floor. Marcus paced. Denise sat alone, arms wrapped around herself, rocking slightly. Detective Reeves waited with them. He didn't have to. His job was done, but he wanted to be there, wanted to see it through. At 4:47 p.m., the jury sent word. They'd reached a verdict. Everyone filed back into the courtroom. The tension was suffocating, the air thick with anticipation. The judge entered. The jury filed in. Their faces were unreadable. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" the judge asked. The foreman stood. "We have, Your Honor. On the charge of first-degree murder in the death of Kimberly Fulton. How do you find the defendant?" "Guilty." Linda gasped. Robert closed his eyes. Marcus exhaled, a sound somewhere between relief and anguish. Denise covered her mouth with her hand, tears streaming down her face. "On the charge of first-degree murder in the death of Kimberly Fulton's son. How do you find the defendant?" "Guilty." The courtroom erupted, not in cheers, in sobs, in cries of relief, in the sound of 22 years of pain finally finding release. The judge banged his gavel. "Order. Order in the court." The defendant sat motionless. His attorney put a hand on his shoulder, but he didn't react. He just stared straight ahead, expressionless. Sentencing was scheduled for 2 weeks later. On November 4th, 2024, the courtroom filled once again. This time, the family was allowed to speak. Victim impact statements. A chance to tell the court, to tell the defendant, to tell the world what had been taken from them. Linda went first. She walked slowly to the podium, a piece of paper in her trembling hands. But when she got there, she didn't read from it. She just looked at the defendant. "You took my daughter," she said, her voice breaking. "You took my grandson. You took 22 years of my life, 22 years of wondering, of hurting, of begging God for answers. You stole their future. You stole our peace. And for what? Money? Pride? Because she said no to you?" She paused, wiping tears from her face. "I hope you think about them every day for the rest of your life. I hope you see their faces when you close your eyes. I hope you never know peace, because we haven't, and we never will. Never them." She walked back to her seat, collapsing into Robert's arms. Marcus spoke next. His statement was shorter, angrier. "You're a coward," he said, staring directly at the defendant. "You killed a woman and a child, and then you hid. For 22 years, you hid. You didn't have the guts to face what you did. But now you have to. And I hope every single day in prison is hell for you." Denise was the last to speak. She was quiet, soft-spoken, but her words cut deep. "My sister was my best friend," she said. "She was the person I called when I was happy, when I was sad, when I needed advice. And you took that from me. You took her laugh, her smile, her hugs. You took everything, and I'll never get it back." She looked at the defendant, her eyes red but steady. "I forgive you," she said. "Not because you deserve it, but because I need to. Because I can't carry this hate anymore. It's too heavy. But forgiveness doesn't mean I've forgotten. And it doesn't mean you shouldn't pay for what you did." The judge listened to every statement. Then he addressed the defendant. "Do you have anything to say?" The defendant stood. His lawyer had advised him not to speak, but he did, anyway. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice barely audible. "I know that doesn't mean anything. I know it doesn't change what I did. But I am sorry. I think about them every day. I wish I could take it back. But I can't." He sat back down. The judge didn't hesitate. "You have been found guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder. The evidence against you was overwhelming. Your own confession sealed your fate. You took 2 innocent lives. A mother who was just trying to provide for her son. A child who had his whole life ahead of him. And you did it for selfish, cowardly reasons." He paused. "I hereby sentence you to life in prison without the possibility of parole. You will spend the rest of your days behind bars. And I hope, in that time, you find some measure of understanding of the pain you've caused." The gavel came down. It was over. The defendant was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs. He didn't look back. Outside, on the courthouse steps, the Fulton family stood together. Reporters surrounded them, cameras flashing, microphones thrust forward. Linda spoke, her voice steady now. "Today, justice was served. It took 22 years. But it finally happened. Kimberly and her son can rest now. And so can we," Marcus added. "We want to thank the Cleveland Police Department, Detective Reeves, the cold case unit, everyone who never gave up. This is for every family still waiting for answers. Don't give up. Keep fighting. Justice is possible." Denise didn't speak. She just stood there, holding her mother's hand, tears streaming down her face. Detective Reeves stood off to the side, watching. He'd done his job. He'd kept his promise. He'd brought them justice. And for the first time in months, he felt like he could breathe. The case made headlines across the country. Two-year-old cold case solved through genealogy. Mother and son finally get justice. Family's perseverance pays off after 2 decades. It became a symbol. A reminder that cold cases aren't forgotten. That families don't give up. That justice, even when delayed, is still justice. In the weeks that followed, the Fulton family returned to the cemetery. They stood by the graves, just like they had so many times before. But this time, it felt different. "We did it," Linda whispered. "We got him. You can rest now." Robert placed flowers on the graves. Marcus stood with his arm around Denise. They stayed for a long time, just standing there, together. Life didn't go back to normal. It never would. The pain didn't disappear. The loss didn't fade. But there was closure now. There were answers. There was justice. And that was something. 22 years. That's how long the Fulton family waited. 22 years of sleepless nights. Of unanswered questions. Of grief that never quite healed because there was no closure, no justice, no peace. But they didn't give up. And that's the lesson here. That's what this story is really about. It's not just about a crime. It's not just about a killer finally being caught. It's about perseverance. It's about a family that refused to let their loved ones be forgotten. It's about detectives who kept working even when the trail went cold. It's about advances in science that gave hope to cases that seemed hopeless. Kimberly Fulton and her son deserved justice. And after more than 2 decades, they finally got it. But here's the hard truth. For every case like this, every cold case that gets solved, every family that finally gets answers, there are dozens more still waiting. Right now, across the United States, there are thousands of unsolved homicides. Thousands of families living in that same limbo the Fultons lived in for 22 years. Wondering, hoping, praying that someday, somehow, someone will come forward. Someone will remember something. Someone will do the right thing. And maybe they will. Maybe advances in DNA technology will crack open cases that have been cold for decades. Maybe a witness who was too scared to speak up back then will find the courage now. Maybe a tip that seemed insignificant years ago will suddenly make sense in a new context. But it takes resources. It takes dedicated cold case units. It takes funding for forensic labs. It takes communities that care enough to keep pushing, to keep demanding answers, to keep saying the names of the victims so they're never forgotten. Kimberly Fulton, her son. Say their names. Remember them. Not just as victims, but as people. As a mother who loved fiercely. As a child who deserved to grow up. As lives that mattered. Their story didn't end in September 2002. It continued through every vigil, every phone call to the police, every march for justice, every moment their family refused to give up. And it ended, or maybe it's better to say it found resolution in 2024, when science and determination finally converged to bring a killer to justice. The Fulton family will never get back what was taken from them. They'll never hear Kimberly's laugh again. They'll never watch her son grow up. They'll never get those 22 years back. But they have something now that they didn't have before. They have answers. They have justice. They have the knowledge that the person who destroyed their lives is finally being held accountable. And they have peace. Not the kind of peace that erases pain, but the kind that comes from knowing you did everything you could, that you fought, that you didn't give up, that you honored the memory of the people you lost by refusing to let the world forget them. Linda Fulton is in her 72nd now. Robert's health is fragile. Marcus and Denise are middle-aged. Their own lives shaped forever by the tragedy that struck when they were younger. But they're still here, still standing, still honoring Kimberly and her son. They've started a foundation, the Kimberly Fulton Justice Fund. It provides support to families of cold case victims. It funds DNA testing for unsolved cases. It advocates for stronger cold case units in police departments across Ohio, because they know what it's like to wait, to hope, to feel forgotten, and they don't want any other family to go through what they went through. Detective Marcus Reeves still works in the cold case unit. The Fulton case was his first major solve, but it won't be his last. He's already working on 3 other cases, 3 other families waiting for answers. Every case matters, he said in a recent interview. Every victim deserves justice, and every family deserves to know the truth. That's why we do this. That's why we don't give up. The defendant is serving his life sentence at a maximum security prison in Ohio. He'll never walk free again. He'll spend the rest of his days behind bars, living with what he did. Some people think that's not enough. That life in prison is too lenient for someone who took 2 lives. Others believe it's exactly what he deserves, a lifetime to reflect on his actions, to live with the weight of his guilt. But regardless of opinion, one thing is certain. He was caught. He was convicted. He was held accountable. And that matters. The case also sparked conversations about genetic genealogy and its role in solving cold cases. It's a powerful tool. But it's also controversial. Questions about privacy, about consent, about how far law enforcement should be allowed to go in using DNA databases. Those are important conversations, necessary conversations. But they don't change the fact that this technology works. It solves cases. It brings killers to justice. It gives families answers. And, as long as it's used responsibly, ethically, with proper oversight, it has the potential to solve thousands of cold cases across the country. Kimberly's story is proof of that. So what can you do? How can you help? If you know something about an unsolved case, any unsolved case, speak up. Even if you think it's not important, even if you're not sure. Call the police. Submit an anonymous tip. You might have the piece of information that breaks the case wide open. If you're interested in supporting cold case investigations, look into organizations that fund DNA testing and forensic research. Donate if you can. Advocate for more resources for cold case units in your community. And most importantly, don't forget. Don't let these stories fade into the background. Don't let the victims become just statistics. Remember their names. Share their stories. Keep their memories alive. Because that's what the Fulton family did. For 22 years, they kept Kimberly's name alive. They kept fighting. They kept hoping. They kept believing that justice would come, and it did. This case is a testament to the power of perseverance, to the importance of never giving up, to the reality that justice, even when it's delayed, is still worth fighting for. Kimberly Fulton was 29 years old when she died. Her son was just a child. They had dreams, plans, futures that were stolen from them. But their story didn't end in tragedy. It ended in justice, in accountability, in a family that refused to let them be forgotten. And that's how we honor them. By remembering, by fighting for justice, by never giving up. Rest in peace, Kimberly. Rest in peace to your beautiful son. Your family fought for you. The world heard your story, and justice was served. If this story moved you, please share it. Someone out there might have information about an unsolved case. Your share could make a difference. It could be the thing that brings another family the answers they've been waiting for. And don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss a story. Because every week, we're here telling these stories, honoring these victims, fighting for justice alongside the families who refuse to give up. Drop a comment below. Tell me what you think. Tell me where you're watching from. Tell me if you've been affected by a cold case. Let's keep this conversation going. Let's keep these stories alive. Because that's how we make sure that no victim is ever forgotten. That no family ever stops fighting. That justice, no matter how long it takes, always has a chance. Thank you for watching. Thank you for caring. And thank you for being part of this community that believes in justice, in truth, and in never giving up. Until next time, stay safe. And remember, if you know something, say something. You could be the key to solving a case. You could be the reason a family finally gets answers.